Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and today we're taking a look at a game on a console that I have yet to review something for, and that being on the Xbox, and that being Tenerezza. So this game was developed and published by Aqua Plus, and it was released in 2003 on both the Xbox and PC, and it happens to be an action RPG. But before we move on and start talking about the game, I do have to bring up a couple small things about trying to get this game to work. So when it comes to the Xbox, I did try to emulate it using a Zemu, and the game seemed to run really well for a while, but then it got to a point where the game just kept constantly crashing. And if you look at the emulator's capability list, you would see that the game is listed under playable, so you would think you would be able to play through the whole game, but unfortunately I wasn't able to with this version. And because this is a very obscure game, I have a feeling that this one might take a while for it to get emulated properly, but I do have some good news, that the PC version, I was actually able to play through the whole game. And thankfully, you don't have to tinker with a bunch of settings and shit in order to get the game to work on Windows 10. Because it really is unfortunate that there's a lot of older games out there that just take a lot of work and a headache just to be able to get to work properly on modern OSs, but thankfully, this one actually worked really good. And for those that are wondering on how I was able to play through this game, even though it's only in Japanese, and I've even mentioned it in one of my Games I Wish Got Fan Translated videos because I thought it looked really interesting. Well, I have to give thanks to the uploader Rudy X because they uploaded a speedrun play of the whole game, so I was actually able to follow that to be able to know exactly what I was supposed to do to progress through the main story. But I'll let you all know now that I wasn't able to do a lot of the side quests though, because there's quite a few in this game, and some of them do seem like that they are a little bit hard to figure out, so unfortunately I wasn't able to do those, but at least I was able to see through the whole main game. So I can definitely say that the game is very playable, even if you don't understand Japanese at the moment. And I also use the Google Translate app on my phone to translate certain text, like the items and all that. So that's how I'm able to do it. So yeah, let's get right on and start talking about the game's story. So this game stars our main character, Tenerezza, and in case you're wondering what the name means, in Italian, it means tenderness. And she's from the town of Esperanza, which is the main town of the game. And she happens to be a witch who loves cooking, and she's also very energetic. So one day she happens to get a request from the mayor who tells her that there is some strange monsters happening about, and she ends up investigating it, and what she finds in the forest happens to be a fairy named Rollo. And Rollo happens to be the lord of the demon forest, and our main character happens to mistake her as a monster, so then they end up fighting, and then after you kick her ass, she ends up joining with you. And apparently she tells the main character that there is a group of bad guys that are trying to take over the world, and the only way that they have a chance is that they have to collect all the elemental magic stones. And there's 4 of them, being wind, fire, earth, and water. And that's the basic of what you need to know about the story. Yeah, it does sound a little bit on the generic side and nothing super crazy. From the few dialogue boxes that I was able to translate though, some of it did seem to be fairly amusing, so maybe the story carries out better in its writing, but I can't really comment too much on that because as you know, the way how Google Translate does things can be a little bit hit and miss at times, so some of the things might not have been super accurate, and on top of that too, direct translations are sometimes not always turns out the best. So I can't really judge too much about it here, but yeah, I can say that it is a pretty basic fantasy story that does kind of remind me of something from Atelier or Atelier, or that series from Gust. So alright, let's get moving on to the gameplay. So in the town of Esperanza, this is your main hub where it has all the different stores that you need, you have an item shop where you can buy and sell stuff. There's also a food stand where you get to buy some food for recipes, and you also get to go to a blacksmith which allows you to buy some weapons and also some accessories and all that. And there is a bar where you can accept requests, and as I said before, I was not able to do many of these. And inside Tenerezza's house, you have a station to cook food in the kitchen, you can also store all your items in a safe, and you can also go upstairs and save your game at the bed. And one thing that's exclusive to the PC version is that if you go to the desk with the open book on it, you can take a look at the gallery of all the monsters that you encountered and reading up on them and all the items that they drop. Kinda weird that this is only on the PC version, because this is actually very helpful if you want to be able to get certain weapons in the game, because in order to get weapons, not only do you gotta pay for them, but you also need to get materials too. So that sums up everything in the town, but as you leave town, this is where it goes to the map, and you get to select what place you want to go to, and yes, you can actually go back to all the places in the game at any time, so there's no, like, getting locked out of an area. So now let's start talking about the game's combat. So you run around, you shoot magic spells at people, being the 4 magical elements, and you can switch between them, and they all have their different types of shots. Personally, I find that the wind one is pretty OP because you can actually shoot 2 of them with 1 shot, and they are kind of like homing missiles. But just like in most RPGs with elements, yeah, of course you can't just spam the wind all the time on every single enemy because, you know, all the enemies do have like their strengths and weaknesses against each element. And besides, it would get kind of boring just only using the one element anyways, but I figured I'd mention that, yeah, that one is definitely the most useful. And there's also a melee attack in this game, which kind of surprised me the first time I played this because I thought it was all just magic. So yes, you go through these long maps, kill some enemies, and they drop some loot, and they also drop some money too. And in certain spots of the map, you can find this traveling girl who can offer to save your game right there at the cost of $500, or you can cook food right there, or you can get sent back home. Now while all this is easy to understand, the one thing you're probably wondering is what about the menus? Like, how do I navigate through this? So the first one is your items, second is equipment, the third one is your skill points, and the fourth and fifth one are your status and options. So the skill points is very similar to many other RPGs out there, is that every time you level up, you just get a point to add on to these bars and fill up. So the first 2 bars at the top are physical strength and offensive power, and then the last 4 are the different elements like earth, water, flame, and wind. And I remember that as soon as you get to level 7, that's when you're actually able to charge up your shots more, and you can actually get a more powerful spell. And I should also mention that whenever you level up in this game, you get fully healed, which is nice. And as we're managing through the items, so the first one is obviously used, the second option is organize, and this is by far one of the greatest things you can have in a game like this because it automatically sorts out and organizes your inventory automatically without having to painstakingly doing it yourself. Because this game has a lot of loot items that you can pick up, so the fact that you can actually organize things neatly like this with the push of a button is really awesome. The third option is to throw away items, and the fourth one is to look at your valuable key items. So if you want to play this game relatively soon, then I would recommend screen capping all this so you can easily remember it. So now let's get moving on to the game's controls, and I have to say the controls in this game are pretty simple and actually do work pretty well for what they are. So with the PC version, you can actually play with both a controller and mouse and keyboard. I actually did try to play with mouse and keyboard just to see what it was like, and I could not get the hang of it whatsoever, so I instead just opted playing with a controller. So I'm mostly going to be talking about that, but if you do want to play with a keyboard, then go nuts. Also, another thing to mention too is that playing with a controller with both the Xbox and the PC version, I think there's like a button or 2 that are swapped with each other, so that is something else to keep in mind as well. So the A button is to attack, and like I said, you can hold it down to charge up. X allows you to bring up the menu, B does the melee attack, Y allows you to use your fairy companion to attack a bunch of enemies on screen, but of course you can't spam it all the time. L and R allows you to switch between magic spells on the fly, and Start and Select allow you to turn on and off the map screen in the corner. So yeah, very simple controls and easy to understand, and for the most part they do feel pretty good. The only complaint I do have is 2 things. One is that the melee attack in this game is a little bit stiff and does have weird hit detection, but because this game is more focused around with the magic spells, you're not going to be using the melee attacks all that much. Sometimes I like to use them like here and there just for shits and giggles because it's kind of fun just to kill some enemies with it, but yeah, for the most part you're mostly going to be using the magic. But I still have to point out that yeah, the melee attacking is still a little bit rough. And my second complaint is that I kind of wish this game had like either a lock-on or some sort of like dodge mechanic, because there doesn't seem to be any of that, and I think that would have benefited this game really nicely, but I still think that the game is still very playable without it. And the next thing I have to mention, and this isn't really a complaint, but it's something to let you all know when you first start out the game, is that When you hold the attack button as you're charging when you first start up the game, you're actually going to be walking a lot slower, and I do find that it did take a little bit to get used to that, but as you get farther through the game and you level up your magic more, you can start running around at your normal walking speed while you charge, which is really nice. So it's one of those games where like, the more you play it and the more you put into it, the better it will feel. But outside of these things, the game's controls are still pretty good and are very well responsive. So now let's get moving on and start talking about the other things, like the graphics, and I think they're very nice looking. I'd mostly say it's really the art style and the bright colors of this game that really makes it look appealing to me. Like, the character designs are pretty decent looking and maybe are a little bit on the cutesy sides, but I do find that they do look nice in this sort of art style. And the monster designs, there are some pretty cool looking ones here and there are some that are like a little bit on the cheesier side compared to everything else, but I do think it does kind of fit with the game's tone. And the game's backgrounds are kind of decent for the most part. Like, I really like the way that the town looks, I like the forest stage, I also like the green field stage, but all the rest of them though, they look alright, nothing bad to say about them, but they just don't really stand out to me as much. And the level layouts themselves kind of have this like dungeon crawler like feel to it, where you got some like hallways and you got some that lead into like open areas, you got kind of stuff like that. But as much as I do like a lot of the stuff in this game and how it looks, I do have to say that this does not look like an Xbox game. Like, if you just showed someone, like, random gameplay of this game, they probably never would guess it was even on the Xbox. They'd probably assume it would be on, like, the GameCube or the PS2. So I do find that to be pretty amusing, but I also do think it is kind of interesting that someone decided to make a game like this on the Xbox, because, well, you know, someone had to support the damn thing in Japan. What this situation reminds me of is that it kind of reminds me of Xanadu Next, where did you guys know that that game was released on the frickin' N-Gage of all things? Yeah, kinda odd, right? But that's kinda what makes it interesting. And the same thing can be said about this game for that, you know, there's just not a whole lot of like super anime looking games on the console. But anyways, overall, I can say that this is a pretty nice looking game. I wouldn't say it's like the best looking game in this sort of style, but I think it's a pretty nice looking one. And as for the game's music, I think it's a pretty solid OST. So the game's OST mostly consists of a lot of like laid back and relaxing type of songs, which I think is pretty fitting for the game, especially for the town music. I also really like the desert theme in the game, I think it just sounds really nice. Also the volcano zone also sounds really awesome sounding, I really like that one a lot. And there are some songs that do play throughout certain cutscenes and events that are actually really good sounding, but don't play until way later in the game. And all the music is at least very fitting for all the settings, for all the ones that I really like are very fitting, and then also the one for the forest stage is very fitting for that it sounds very like simple but yet kinda atmospheric. And also some events where there's some like comedy bits happening also do sound very much like a comedy bit from an anime, which is also very fitting. So while the OST is pretty good, I do find that there are some songs in here that are a little bit on the forgettable side and aren't super memorable to me, but I do think there is like a decent amount of tracks in here that I do think are memorable and good enough that I can say that I do enjoy the OST for what it is. And as for the game's voice acting, well, I can't really say if it's like good or bad because, you know, it's only in Japanese and I can't really say a whole lot about it though, but there is some things I do want to mention about it. So Tenerezza was played by Yumi Kakazu, and she is most famous for doing roles like Kula Diamond, Yuffie from Final Fantasy VII, in fact she still voices her to this day, and even in Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0, she played Anzu, aka Taya Gardner. So I think it's pretty interesting knowing that someone who has done all these really cool iconic roles is in like such a random ass game like this, and is the lead. And the next two that I'm going to briefly mention is that these two roles, unfortunately, they kind of annoyed me, but I kind of wanted to talk about them just because I just thought it'd be kind of funny, and that being that, so there's this like girl who wears like red, I know she talks to you at the very beginning of the game. Well, that person's voice, like, irritated the piss out of me so much that every time I heard it, I just wanted to take a nail gun and shoot my ears off with it. Now, I'm not saying that it was, like, poorly acted or anything. I mean, I don't know, for all I know, it could be considered as amazing voice acting work, and maybe the director told them, hey, you, can you be, like, as annoying and obnoxious as possible? Alright, thank you, here's your paycheck. But yeah, every time that she talked, I just skipped that dialogue immediately. I'm like, nope, you're shutting the fuck up. And the next one I just want to make fun of real quick is the voice of Calum, I think his name is, if I got the translation right. He's like this like red-haired guy who wears armor, and no, he's not at all from the East games. So for the most part, I find his voice, like, sounds pretty fine. I don't really have much to say about it, but the one thing about it that I don't like is his laugh. I don't know why, it just sounds really wrong to me, and it also just sounds really stupid to the point where it just sounds like it's forced. And I've heard plenty of different voice acting work in Japanese when it comes to animes and video games. I never heard anything like that at all, so yeah, I don't know. Maybe it is good, maybe it's shit, but either way, I just really felt like I needed to mention it just because I just thought it was too weird not to. So, moving along, so now, if you wanted to go out and buy yourself a copy of this game, I haven't seen very many, but I've actually seen 3 copies of it on the Xbox, and they were going for $200, and there was even one of them going for almost $300. And as for the PC version, there's a complete in-box one that's selling for $420, like, holy shit. Well, the good news that I can say for you is that if you do want to play the PC version, the way how I played it was that you can actually go and download it off of the archive, and there you go. So now, as for my overall thoughts on Tenerezza, is that I think this was actually a pretty nice, fun, chill game. Like, it was fairly relaxing to play through it, even though I did have to, like, painstakingly translate a bunch of shit over and over. But despite that, though, everything else was good and fun enough just to play through. So yeah, the story itself, I can't really comment on too much, but from what I've gathered was that, yeah, it's nothing super great, but that's fine. I mean, you know, not everything needs to be, like, super epic and deconstruction bullshit. And the gameplay I liked quite a bit. Now, yeah, I did say that, like, I wish there was, like, a proper, like, dodge mechanic, and I also said that the melee attacks are not the greatest. I still found it to be pretty enjoyable to just run around the map, shooting up a bunch of enemies on the field, while doing all this on some pretty interesting looking stages with some nice music that's also pretty relaxing. But as much as I like all this, there are 2 things I do have to mention though. So for one thing I do think that is kind of annoying is that you can only carry like 20 items on you at a time, and because this game like drops so much loot on you, you're going to be filling up that inventory space rather quickly. Now, I don't know if there's a way that you can get like a bigger bag to hold like more items on you at a time. I'm sure there might be one, but as I said before, I wasn't able to do many of the side quests because there was no proper walkthrough for them. So I'm not going to make that like a huge complaint for that. Like I said, there might be one in the game, but in case there isn't though, I really think there should be. Also, I have to mention that this is probably the biggest issue with the game, but it's only available on the Xbox version, weirdly enough. I guess the PC version, they actually fixed it, but apparently in the Xbox version, there's a glitch in the game where if you activate a certain cutscene, it will actually softlock you, and then you're basically fucked and can't continue the game. And from the 3 websites that I've seen that mention this glitch, tells me that it's probably real and it's not bullshit, but what sucks about it is that they don't like give into like specific detail about when it happens. So because of this, unfortunately, I can't tell you like where it happens if you do play the Xbox version, but I gotta say that if you do, just be wareful of that, and make sure to make a bunch of different saves in case you do run into it on accident. So for that reason alone, I can definitely say that the PC version is the way to go. Plus you get the monster gallery as well, which really should have just been a basic feature in the original game. So anyways, yeah, I can definitely say that this is a game that I would recommend to most people. The only thing is that obviously it's only in Japanese at the moment, so it would be hard to recommend it right now, but if it did get a fan translation, I can see a lot of people enjoying this one if they want a more like simple but yet fun RPG that isn't like excruciatingly difficult. Yeah, I didn't mention that. Yeah, this game's pretty damn forgiving. Like whenever you die in this game, it just takes you back to your house and you just lose half your money. And getting money in this game is not super difficult either. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was quite good. Obviously, I wouldn't say it's like the best action RPG I ever played, but I do think it does offer some different things that I thought was a little bit refreshing. Like the fact that you can use both melee attacks and just use a bunch of different like magic spells and switch between them on the fly. And of course the fact that it combines like, you know, like the way how you make weapons and the cooking, and yeah, I barely talked about the cooking in this game. But it's very straightforward, and you really shouldn't be too confused about how that works. It's just, you know, you won't be able to read what ingredients you need. But yes, I'll end it off by saying that I had a fun time with a game that was super anime looking, that was made by a company that mostly makes visual novels like Two Heart, and it was released on Xbox and PC. Who would have thought? So with that being said, thanks for watching and commenting, and have yourselves a great day.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!